first thing we need to understand, more specifically, the soul's connection to the body. And I'll lay it right out for you. Casey says the soul connects to the body through three systems of the body. He says through the endocrine glands, through the sympathetic system, which you've already talked about. And by the way, the pineal is one of those endocrine glands. And he says also the sensory nervous system. So let's look at the first one, the endocrine glands. Here they are laid out. He actually corresponded these to the 7 churches, candlesticks, and so forth. Notice that we have the gonads in the red at the lower part, the Leyden, the mysterious Leyden, also called the Leydig, and I'll talk about that in a moment. Pay particular attention to that Leyden or Leydig gland, because he said that's part of the seat of the soul of the individual. The adrenals, thymus, thyroid, pineal, and pituitary. Okay, the pineal is actually a little higher anatomically in the head, and the pituitary is more toward the front, toward the brow, the nose, and so forth. But he said the pituitary, even though it's lower in the body, is higher in its vibration and so forth. It's a higher spiritual center. So pay particular attention to the Leyden or Leydig and the pineal, because we're going to come back to those in just a little bit. Now, the second aspect of the soul's connection to the body is the sympathetic nervous system. And he said the activity of the mental or soul force of the body may control entirely the whole physical through the action of the balance in the sympathetic system. For the sympathetic nerve system is to the soul and spirit forces as the cerebral spinal is to the physical forces of the entity, especially as is shown in this body here. Okay? And so again, he's using some of those terms which can get confusing at times, but essentially he said we have a sympathetic nervous system. He referred to the sympathetic nervous system as the brain manifestation of soul forces. It's the brain of the soul. Okay? There's a whole talk I give just on the brain of the soul, but that's essentially what he's saying here. And he's saying the cerebral spinal, which we now call the central nervous system, he says that pertains more to the conscious mind, and this sympathetic more to the unconscious mind. And he says the unconscious mind is the mind of the soul. Hence, the sympathetic system is the brain of the soul. So a lot of your unconscious soul sort of manifestations and patterns can come through this sympathetic system. He also called it the imaginative system relating to that. Now, here's an illustration of the sympathetic system from a book called The Abdominal and Pelvic Brain by a medical doctor, Byron Robinson. He wrote the book in 1907. And this book is over 700 pages long, 200 detailed anatomical drawings when he documents the abdominal and pelvic brains and this great sympathetic nervous system. He said this book is a treatise on the sympathetic system. So if you want to understand the sympathetic system the way Casey talked about it, here's your source. I've colored it in yellow. Notice the right around in the middle there where the kidneys and adrenals are, that's the solar plexus brain, the pelvic brain near the bottom. And these yellow nerves, particularly the ones up the spinal cord, notice that they're sort of little ganglia there, little enlargements. They are the sympathetic nerves along the spine. Not only do we have them in the body cavity in the abdominal and pelvic brains and so forth, but they go along the spinal column on either side, okay, but they're outside the spinal column itself. So they lie outside the bone, and they come down, and where each vertebrae is, there's a little enlargement or a plexus. What I'm not showing you here is that these plexuses are not all the same. Some of them are more important than others. Some of them are enlarged and fused, and I'll talk about that later because he says at about 3 locations there, he said they're fused together, and that's how the soul connects through the spinal column. And that's the centers where he said attach the wet cell plates. The osteopathic adjustment should coordinate the centers and so forth. And I'll follow up on that later in the talk. Just laying it out for you when we talk about the sympathetic system. Now, the third major connection of the soul with the body, he said, is through the sensory system. In the soul forces and its dwelling in man, we find the animation, the spiritual element, the soul, that developing element, and contained in the brain, in the nerve, in the centers of the whole system, as to the specific centers near those centers of the sensory system, physically speaking. Okay? Now, if you're studying the Revelation, this would be the cranial nerves, the 24 elders, the 12 pair of cranial nerves. And with regard to the sensory system, here we have, so if you sort of take the brain and took it out of the skull and turned it upside down and saw the nerves coming out, you have the 12 pair of cranial nerves going to the various senses of the body, okay? And so why would this be an important part of the soul's connection with the physical body? And what I would tell you is, think about the soul and how it came in Casey's creation story, how we as souls, we are the souls that came in and and sort of found ourselves in a material world and moved in and out of the various forms and life forms. And he said some of us got stuck here, okay? And we probably got stuck here because of this system, the sensory system. We loved sensation, the sensuality of flesh and material realms. This was part of the attraction. And we still love it. I mean, we hate meditation where we have to shut this system down, or actually we don't shut it down entirely. We focus it introspectively, he said. But we like to have our senses filled up. We like to taste and smell and touch and all of those things in a physical body. So that's part of the major part of the soul's connection is through the sensory system.